This furniture flip is going to upset some timber purists, but you know what? This piece was so banged up that the local recycle centre wouldn't even take it. It had missing trim, it had a split on the top, most of the handles were either broken or missing, and most of the drawer rails were broken as well. So no, I'm not going to paint it, but I am going to reimagine this one. I'm going for a lighter timber look as opposed to that traditional cedar golden warm look. What I had to do first though was repair these drawer slides. Now this particular set, I had never seen drawer slides like this that were purely attached to the side of the piece, and a right angle of timber was sort of supporting the drawer as it came in. But I just recreated what I saw where there was a complete drawer slide. So I'm replacing the timber that was missing here, and then I got some offcuts of timber and I used those to be the supporting piece that was to go underneath and attach to the piece of timber that I'm putting on now. You can see it a little better here. These are the offcuts, and this is where they're going to sit. So they sit here. As the drawer comes in, it's sliding along that piece of timber. There wasn't a lot to attach here too, so instead of actually drilling down into the piece of timber that was connected to the side of the piece, I glued and then drilled pocket holes so that I could come through the piece of timber that was on the side and into the side of the piece as well. Obviously making sure not to come through the side. The next thing I noticed about these drawers was they all had a drawer stopper. Now this is to stop the drawer from going too far back and sliding into the body of the piece. So I just recreated this again, measuring up and then cutting these little blocks and gluing them into place. The next repair I had to make was the trim, and for this I found a piece of timber that was the same depth as the existing. So at that widest point, that's where I gauged the depth. I glued and nailed that into place, and then I used my sander to shape the round, that curve. So I'm taking off the corners using that existing trim as the guide. It was then time to start removing the existing finish from the top so that I could deal with the split. Now I'm using my tungsten carbide blade here. This is essentially a very sharp blade that I'm scraping across the surface of the piece to remove the finish, and it's an alternative to using a chemical-based stripper or just jumping straight in and sanding this finish off. The split on the top here was aesthetic more than anything. At one end, there was a little bit of a warp, which I was able to bring into alignment by simply clamping and using some nails. I then ran some PVA glue along the split line so that when I sanded the top of this piece down, the sanding dust that I was creating would fall down into this crack and start to fill it. I started sanding the body and the top of the piece with 120 grit sandpaper. I then moved up to 180 grit sandpaper, and I finished with 240 grit. For those that are unfamiliar, sandpaper is graded from low to high. The lower the number, the coarser the grade of sandpaper. The higher the number, the finer the grade of sandpaper. For the drawer fronts, I followed the same process. I carbide scraped most of the finish off, and then I went in with that 120, 180, 240 grit sandpaper combo. Now you would have seen just how warm cedar goes when it is sealed when I cleaned the piece down on the top. That actually mimics what this timber is going to do if I was to put a clear on top. But the piece of pine that I had put on the side for the trim didn't have that level of warmth. So I'm doing a color correction here so that when I apply my paint wash, I'm going to get more of a uniform result. I'm using a water-based stain here. Very important that if you are going to do this and paint wash over the top, that you use a water-based stain. Water-based stain can be covered by paint wash. Oil-based stain cannot be covered by paint wash. I'm using that little brush, I'm working it on. I did a couple of rounds of this, wiping off the excess until I could wet down the timber that was next to this piece and it'd be fairly similar. This is definitely a trust the process moment, so wait until the end and I'll do a little close-up so you can see what I mean. For my paint wash, I used this oyster grey tone, which I wouldn't be able to tell you the name of because I got it on the clearance trolley, and this warmer tone here so that I could get more of a freshly sanded result as opposed to a deep, rich honey tone. I applied 3 rounds of this paint wash mix using my paint sprayer. I'm applying the paint wash, I wipe the excess off, and then I dry in between with the air from my spray gun. In this case, you can use a hairdryer if you've got that on hand as well. You also want to make sure that you lightly sand in between each coat of paint wash just to eliminate any raised grain that may have popped up when you applied the paint wash. Once that was completely dry, I sealed everything with 2 coats of water-based varnish. For the handles, I definitely wanted something that was going to be more in alignment with what they had been traditionally, and because I had done a raw timber look, I did have a little bit of a shadow from the previous handles that I needed to cover up. This handle, it did take me a couple of months to get a full set of these, but it did cover that shadow and I thought they looked really pretty, especially with the paint wash colour. Okay, guys, you've made it to the end. Here's a quick reminder of where we started out, and this is where we are now. This piece really challenged me. There were a lot of things to overcome, the drawer slides, the split on top, the missing trim, but it's functional now. I love the color. I think it looks really soft. You can still see that subtle cedar timber grain coming through. The liners in the drawers work really cohesively with the patterns on those top two drawers, and the little piece on the side blends really well now. As always, I'd love to know what you guys think at home though, so jump in the comments, let me know. Timber purists, be kind. Is this one a nail or a fail?